Hello, Dr. Sushma Singh this side. Today in Unit 25, Critique of Knowledge Society, we are going to start our lecture with the topic A Critical Appraisal of Discourses on Web-Based Knowledge Dispersal. There are different discourses that relate knowledge and power in a knowledge-based society. Foucault, who demonstrated how knowledge and power are related, argues whenever someone transmits knowledge, it involves power. Whenever power is exerted, knowledge is involved. The four discourses related to internet-based knowledge transmission, which form the significant basis of the knowledge-based society, are Techno Utopism, Technocyanicism, Technocyanicism, and Technostructuralism. In this section, let us look briefly the counters of these theoretical discourses. The centralization of dispersal of knowledge power through the medium of internet and World Wide Web is the main question in all these four discourses. Now let us discuss Techno-Utopianism. Techno-Utopians are optimists who believe the web leads to greater access to the education and thereby greater dispersal of knowledge. This facilitates the universal accessibility of knowledge, and this may lead to empowerment of a larger section of the population because in knowledge-based society, the acquisition of knowledge empowers the individuals. In this discourse, they argue the web lowers barriers that impede access to education in face-to-face setting. Web will eventually result in equality. Web reaches the hard to reach, and web straddles cultural boundaries. Web constitutes a paradigm shift in learning and education. Web fosters high degrees of interaction. Web leads to reinstallation of fading local democracies. Web invites learner participation. Web encourages a desirable level of collaborative learning, teamwork, and cooperation. Techno-Utopian often have a global vision about the ICT infrastructure. They are criticized for this global vision because they talk about ICT penetration without taking into account local particularities. They predict a universal dispersal of knowledge through internet and World Wide Web without taking into consideration the fact that a vast majority of the world's population are in developing countries where the first priority of the people, even in this 21st century, is the basic amenities of the life, not ICT infrastructure. For example, in developing Asia, despite techno-utopian talk of paradigm shift, there are only roughly 9.8 million people online, a mere 0.3% of the population. Techno-utopian version of information highway is an utopian narrative which argues that progress and salvation through technology and transportation makes little sense in most part of the world even today. If the techno-utopians fall to view technological advancements in the societal context of inequalities, illiteracy, poverty, ill health, and other forms of the social backwardness that persist in many parts of the globe, the paradigm shift that they claim the technology will bring about many instead lead to a paradigm lost. Now let us move to technocynicism. Technocynics are a critical view about the role of internet and web in the dispersal of knowledge. They do not believe that the web is a wired utopia for learning and education. Instead, they argue it will lead to a concentration of power. Technocynics are realists, distrust corporatism and commodification of education, and regard globalization as a code for Americanization. They argue that the web will not significantly enhance access to education. Web will not yield equality. Web will aggravate the gap between the haves and have-nots. Web will converge around the orthodoxy of American. Web will help foster free trade on the world and thus lower occupational health and environmental regulations. Web enable global enterprises to monitor markets and web instances adjustments with the click of a mouse and thus reinstall exploitative colonialism. Technocynics are largely cynical of techno-utopian ideas. They argue that the technology itself is not bad. The problem is in the way it constructs relationship. They believe being too connected online may deprive people of humanity. Interactions through net give people a chance to ignore the human side of such relationships. A disturbing part of the technocynic position is enunciated by Mandar, who argues that economic globalization involves the most fundamental redesign of socio-political and economic arrangements since the Industrial Revolution. Advocates and beneficiaries of the new order, free trade, deregulation, restructuring, use computers not to empower communities, as techno-utopians would claim, but as a tool of financial exploitation. Computer technology may actually be the most centralizing technology ever invented, at least in terms of economic and political power. This much is certain. The global cooperation of today could not exist without computers. The technology makes globalization possible by conferring a degree of control beyond anything ever seen before. Of the globalization was called colonization. Techno-cynics disagree with the techno-utopians in many grounds. They argue that the virtual universities are major mode for the dispersal of knowledge in knowledge societies according to the utopians in effect will function as digital diploma mills. Noble, a leading North American exponent of Technocyanicism, claims that online courses will lead to commercialization of higher education, the loss of faculty independence, a second-rate shadow cyber education, and virtual universities with perhaps no faculty whatsoever. Another argument is on the basis of racial divide. In the United States, access to the web appears to depend on race. According to a study done by Hoffman and Novak in 1998, in late 1996 and early 1997, 44.3% of the whites and only the 29% of the black Americans own a home computer. In households with the income $40,000 or less, white people were 6 times more likely than black people to have used the web in the week prior to the survey. Manifestation of technocynicism arises from the web's inclination to promote a conservative view of education. They argue that there is much more to education than filling empty vessels or producing stuffed dogs. The problem with web learning, according to them, is with the fact that the web and too many other distance technologies deliver information without raising appropriate questions or making a critical evaluation of information transferred. The web causes people to think of education as an information transfer process. We are building an educational system on the assumption that our minds are a lot of hard drives that can simply be filled up with data. Here we want to close this lecture. Thanks for listening.